expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, did race play a part in the George Zimmerman trial? That will be the topic of the conversation. Plus, where do we go from here? That's up next on this edition of Perspectives with yours truly, Darren Hyman.
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective which shines a light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life. What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective?
Thank you for joining this edition of Perspectives. I'm Darren Hyman. Of course, we invite you to share on our show. How do you share? You share on our social networking sites. We got Twitter. You can tweet us, and you can find out the latest episodes of Perspectives through Twitter. We'll tweet you what's happening and what's going on. We, of course, want to hear your feedback. And also, we have for Facebook. And you can be able to share with us about some of the past episodes, what you like, what you dislike, what you'd like to see on it. And so that's why our social networking sites are there so that we can network with you. And glad to have you sharing with us here today. Coming up on Perspectives, we're talking today about did race play a part in the George Zimmerman trial and the death of Trayvon Martin. The truth is we will never know, but on this very special edition of Perspectives, we address that front and center. We'll discuss whether there was a racial undertone in the jury's decision, as well as finding out exactly where do we go from here. The final result ended with the jury, 16 hours of deliberation coming up with George Zimmerman being found not guilty in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin. Subsequently, public outrage across America as some are left to ask the question, what justice will be served for a young man that lost his life and arguably innocently just at the hands of George Zimmerman. Our guest in studio sharing with us on this is sharing his perspective is Pastor Tim English. He's the pastor of the Bronx Christian Fellowship Church right here in the Bronx, New York. He's also the co-chair of the Bronx Clergy Roundtable. And Pastor English, good to have you.
Great to be here with you, sir. Excited about it.
Good. When we talk now about the acquittal of George Zimmerman, first of all, when you watch the verdict, your thoughts?
Not surprised.
Not surprised?
Not surprised at all.
Why?
Because we live in a racist America. And I believe that the sooner we face that as a people, as a community, the sooner we can begin to fix it and to rectify it. Just because we live side by side and ride the subways together, you know, there's still that insidious, you know, you just not like me, you know. Mm-hmm. And if you, my thought was, if the skin colors were different, the outcome would have been different.
Really?
That's a fact.
So when you watched the case on trial, did you have an idea already that it was, because you had some people say, listen, this thing was going down the tanks as we were watching certain testimony, and you watched Rachel Gentile, and you've watched other, it looked like things were going down the tanks for the prosecution. Did you get that sense? I felt like
at some point, something was going to happen that he was going to get to go free. Mm-hmm. Something was, I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was going to be. You know, something was going to happen that the jury was going to say exactly what they said. Mm-hmm. Was not surprised by it at all. We're dealing with it. I mean, it's a systemic problem. Look at what we're dealing with right now in the Bronx with Romali Graham. You know, there's a systemic issue that no other community can address but us. Mm. And when we talk about where do we go from here, I want to introduce an idea because I feel like it's not going to change until we change it.
So when the verdict comes down, it comes down around 10 o'clock on Saturday. Obviously, you have an opportunity to see it. You go to church on Sunday. You have to preach to your congregation. You have to speak to your congregation because obviously we saw tweets and Facebook pages from celebrities, athletes, entertainers, actor Jamie Foxx being with the Trayvon Martin family. What do you tell your congregation on Sunday morning?
To thank God for protection. I really try to teach our congregation to really appreciate God's protection over our life. Because but for the grace of God, it could be any of us at any time, in any place. Mm-hmm. And then let God do what he's going to do. Because I believe justice will prevail. You know, I think the justice that I seek to have happen is that this irritates us enough, this stirs us enough that as a community we fix the situation. You know, not just pockets of demonstrations and things, and that's great, but as a community there's some definite things we can do that will change what we're dealing with right now.
You have critics who said right now there are a lot of protests going on and there's a lot of agitation going on, but you have people who say, listen, that's good, but that's not the answer. Agree, disagree?
That's part of the answer. That's not the end-all, fix-all. Clearly not. Those demonstrations, those marches, and we support them. There's one coming up where, you know, we're remembering the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's March on Washington. So we've got buses coming out of the Bronx, New York, going down to D.C., working with Nan on that. So I'm for all those things. Mm-hmm. But for sure, that's not all we need. Mm-hmm. Yeah, clearly.
Right.
You know.
When you look at race playing a part of this, the question is that we asked in the beginning was the jury's acquittal of George Zimmerman, from your perspective, racially motivated?
I believe so, but I don't believe it was an overt racism, and this is what I mean when I'm talking about a systemic problem. I believe that from their lens and the life that informed their lens, they wouldn't believe that they were racist, right? But because I understand the life that informed their lens, they're racist. And that's what we've got to recognize. They in the core of them, because of what they were taught, how they were raised, the situation of their life, never having sat where we sit. It's at the very worst a biased decision.
Because there's a difference between being biased
Absolutely.
and being racist.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, does one is it safe to say because one has not had the experience that they would be biased as opposed to being racist?
And that to me is what's most dangerous. That's what's most dangerous, because if we make it palatable and say, well, I'm just biased, that's my slant, then I can get away with coming to the wrong conclusion. I can get away with not being open about what informs my decisions. And so a community's well-being is at jeopardy.
I'm going to give you a perspective. You tell me what you think. I had a chance they asked me what I thought, and of course, you know, we're supposed to be objective, but I have to give my opinion at certain points. And I said, I believe that the jury did what it was supposed to do based on what it got. In other words, if you tell me to work with the 3 pennies within the square and tell me to find out if there are 3 pennies within the square, then obviously I'm going to find out that there are 3 pennies within the square if they're there. I work with what I got.
And what you bring to the table. All your past experiences, everything else comes to the table with you working on what you got. You can't exclude you from what you've got to work with. So you're absolutely right. Based on what they were presented, they did what they were supposed to, right? But they included in that equation has to be the individuals themselves.
But as you looked at the trial, profiling could not be included from what we looked at. Profiling wasn't included as a part of the law in making the determining factor. The determining factor was in that last-minute tussle, what happened. If profiling was a part of the law, then we probably would have saw a different outcome. But given the fact that you got these guys who are, or I should say these ladies, who have to really deal with the fact of really just coming to terms on whether or not in this tussle he was actually murdered or whether or not there was actual self-defense, it almost like tied your hands.
You're right. You're right. So I find no fault with them. What we've got to address is that we have a systemic problem.
Which is the law.
The law and the interpretation of the law and those who feel they can live above the law. We've got several issues and several fronts to work on. You think about this. What my hope is that all of these things that are beginning to happen and seem like they're coming more in more rapid fire would ignite us as a community to say we can't expect other people to do it. We've got to fix this ourselves. You know, that we have an issue, we have a problem. And if we don't get together ourselves and fix it, then it's never going to be fixed.
We want to talk about the tipping point when we return right here on Perspectives. Pastor Tim English, our guest here. Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this.
There is also a very attractive extended warranty option that includes free service and parts for the next 5 years. But there's no need for you to get that. You failed to get the test you needed at the doctor that would have detected disease early enough where it could have been treated. So you won't be around in 2 years to see him grow up, which means the warranty would be useless. Okay, sign here, please.
For a list of tests every man should have, go to ahrq.gov.
This is so cool, Dad. Awesome. This is so cool, Dad.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
I love being in classrooms like this one and learning new things. But I'm a Brooklyn girl, and I know school can be hard. It's demanding, and we kids have many distractions, lots of other things we could be doing. Sometimes even your friends may tell you that school isn't cool, that it isn't the place to be. Don't listen to them. There's nothing more important than education. It's the key to everything else. It helps us understand our world and be better people, better friends, and better citizens. So stay in school, and don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough or smart enough. Be a star, shine brighter than anyone else, and you'll make the grade.
This has been a public service announcement of the Make the Grade Foundation. Go to makethegrade.org to learn more.
Megan, you're a tramp. Ryan Fitch told me you guys made out. Everybody knows. He says you're the most desperate girl he knows, besides your mom. How many boyfriends does she have anyway? Lots? That zit is huge. Zit face. Ugly.
And welcome back here to Perspectives. Darren Jaime here with you. We're continuing our conversation talking about the George Zimmerman trial in the death of Trayvon Martin. Was race a factor? And joining us now to continue our conversation is a Democratic strategist and journalist and author and a whole lot of other things, Roy Paul, who we can find doing some great work in the community and really getting his voice be heard. And Roy, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
I was wrong with author? You wrote some things, right?
You're speaking into the future, so I'm not going to.
Soon to be author. That way I'm not wrong. Okay, there it is. I want to talk to you about the trial, and certainly, of all seriousness, the question that was asked before the break was, given the fact that we're seeing protests, outrage from all races and all sides of the spectrum, that George Zimmerman walks away with no accountability and pretty much as a free man. The question is this Trayvon Martin shooting going to be the tipping point for not just the African American community, but for America, much like what Rosa Parks was and in the civil rights movement. Do you find this to be the tipping point, or is this just going to be a conversation piece?
Well, we certainly hope that it's going to be something that would be the tipping point. But as we see, and I'm sure the Reverend would agree, every time there is an outrage, every time there is a community outcry about something that happened, there always seems to be this temporary fixation with trying to get out there and speak our minds, and then we somehow forget that these issues affect us as individuals. And so I hope that it's not just another Ramarley grandmother, Trayvon Martin, that we get to the point where we realize that if we don't start fixing the institutional problems that created this mess in the first place, we're just going to keep going after this one after the other, and it could be me, it could be the Reverend, it could be one of the men operating these cameras or women operating these cameras. So until we get to a point where we understand that it's not just these individuals, it's not just Trayvon Martin that it's happening to, that it could happen to us, then we're not going to wake up.
When you talk about dealing with the issues at hand and the things that need to be corrected, what are some of the things that we could definitely put our voice to that needs correction from your perspective?
Well, I think there are a number of fronts. First, there's a legislative front. The Stand Your Grounds laws should have never been enacted to begin with. Out there in the state of Florida and the other states that have enacted it, people are now taking a closer look at how to rectify that from a legislative perspective. A good friend of mine, Dwight Bullard, was in the state representative, the House of Representatives in Florida when this bill was enacted. He's now a state senator, leading the fight to repeal this law. So we need people in office who believe in good government and not these archaic laws that are going to make sure that we disenfranchise people from their right to be on the streets. Then we need, I think, from a mobilization standpoint, from a grassroots standpoint, we need people who care about hitting the ground pavement, doing peaceful protesting, getting out there in the communities. Many of us would consider ourselves activists, but that means that we sit at home and we look at the television screen and we yell at it and we may throw something at it. But in terms of getting out into the streets, writing letters, picking up the phone and calling your representatives, that's important. That's a part of being an activist and getting out in the community. So if you don't see this as a holistic problem that everybody can participate in, then we're going to have serious problems moving forward.
And, you know, in all actuality, the person who actually wrote the Stand Your Ground law, the actual legislator that wrote it, has been quoted as saying that this George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin incident was not what Stand Your Ground was really based on. So it's pretty interesting to note that even the one who wrote the legislation says that Stand Your Ground, really, this was not a case that should fall under the Stand Your Ground legislation. When you talk about, you're the co-chair of the Bronx Christian Clergy Roundtable, I should say, clergy and faith community coming together. Has there been any talk since the verdict of what's going to happen amongst faith community?
Well, right now there's a kind of galvanizing. We're beginning to talk amongst ourselves what our next steps should be, and initially it's if somebody's doing something. If somebody's hosting a protest, then get people there. So that's where we are right now. I believe, though, that we're going to need to do something far greater, and I think it's going to have to. The faith community is going to have to lead the fight. I believe. What we've seen in our history is the church or the house of worship has always been, the focal point or the nucleus of social change. And I believe that that's what we have to get back to. We bought into the lie of separation of church and state. And so now we've got, and that's my opinion, that, that the whole separation thing is not what it intended to be. So yes, we're going to start to galvanize, we're going to, there are going to be rallies, there's going to be those kinds of things. But what I want to put forth and even ask you, what do you think about this? Because what I hope, as my partner here was saying, the hope is that this does galvanize us. This stirs us enough to get past our, short attention span, because we're hyper about this, and then in a few days, it's like our attention span is done, so we've gone to something else. What I'm hoping is that we would start a movement. What if we did this? What if we started a Stop Killing Us movement, right? That says that we're not going to tolerate another dark-skinned person being murdered in our cities, not by them nor by us. And we have to start first. What if we did that?
Well, let me ask you your perspective on this, because we've heard a lot of people say, and this was I was watching one very hotly contested debate on Fox News in Houston, where you had two commentators, one an African American, one a white, and the white person was very forward and very loud and boisterous, and it got into a very large argumentative fact that, and this is what the one white commentator said, the black commentator, why aren't you so incensed about the killing in your own community in as much as trying to make Trayvon Martin a matter of race? If you were sitting at the table, what would you say?
Well, while they may be true, that still doesn't solve the issue. It deflects from the actual problem here. If you go back to the Trayvon Martin case, there are so many people who were trying to compare Trayvon Martin to George Zimmerman. This is a 17-year-old boy to, I don't know how old George Zimmerman, but he's clearly a man. And they're trying to somehow justify his actions as if the brain span of the 17-year-old has the same kind of cerebral cortex capabilities of George Zimmerman. I don't understand how they can compare his actions compared to this boy's. And so we got to get to a point where we actually start judging people based on where they are. A 17-year-old boy who was justified in being where he was versus a man who had a deadly weapon who had no justifiable reason for using it. That's the problem here. And so you can't take that situation and then compare it with all the incidences of black-on-black crime in urban neighborhoods. I don't see where the correlation exists there. So one does not equal another. Where we got to get to a point is in this country where we understand the institutional situations here. In that courtroom, the fact that stand your ground law was not an applicable defense for George Zimmerman, the fact that the judge did not allow race to be used in this case, the fact that the 6 white women jurors didn't even see that there was an issue with respect to race in this case. We've got to get to that issue, and that's the conversation we need to have on a broader level, the institution of racism in this country. How do we solve that issue? How do we solve the fact that young black boys can't get a fair trial in this country? Before this case even got national attention, no one was paying attention to this Trayvon Martin case. In fact, if it was up to people who just let things be bygones, then we would never be, George Zimmerman probably would never been tried with this case in the first place. So we got to get to that issue. What happens in our society where we have young black men who were murdered in the street and the criminal justice system pretty much says, oh, he was justified in doing what he was doing, so we don't have to take care of this case? That's the problem.
And people ask the question, and so to ask, when they ask the question about how does race play a part in the George Zimmerman, race shouldn't have played a part into the George Zimmerman trial. But I looked at when you had the neighbor, which that probably was the biggest problem for me, was when I saw this young white neighbor come in and she testified about her home invasion, and she pretty much described who went in and how it was. That wasn't the actual, and at no point was Trayvon Martin ever, and the fact that remains for me is that he wasn't trespassing. He was within his own neighborhood. And so when you compare somebody from outside the neighborhood who does not belong to somebody who legitimately had a right to be within the community, I thought that was kind of skewed when you brought that before the judge. And when you look at a lot of things that went on in there, a lot of people still walk away with a lot of questions.
It's a problem. It's a system problem. That's exactly what he's saying. And that's what we as a community have to decide. Enough of that. And there are ways, and one of the things that we don't hear talked about too much is we ought to use our economic power. If you look at African American spending in America, if we withheld our dollars, whoever we withhold our dollars from would cripple. Look at, have people look at how much spending we do as an African American community. It's huge annually.
When you look at some of the things that have occurred, since then is we've heard Tom Joyner come on the radio and say that he is actually offering Rachel Gentile a full college scholarship to whatever college of her choice was. I saw Rachel Gentile's interview with Piers Morgan, and to be honest with you, I got more out of the Piers Morgan interview than I did really out of her being on the stand. Did you guys see the Rachel Gentile interview at all?
I did.
If you did.
Yes.
Your thought?
Well, it's so funny because this is a perfect example of all the different issues that are affecting our community, not just as African Americans, but as a whole. With the criminal justice system, she's an excellent example of that. With the educational system that she went through, K through 12, there was clearly a problem there. So she is representative of what it means to be young, black, and the system that she is in, with the environment she grew up in and the schools she went to. Yes. And for us to criticize that as a community without even dealing with those issues, see, we're kind of painting over these issues a little bit. We're putting Band-Aids on these problems. We're blaming Rachel Gentile for being in the situation that she grew up in. I don't understand this. Right. Why don't we deal with the educational flawed system that we have? Why don't we deal with the flawed criminal justice system that we have instead of blaming the products of it?
Right. And she even said that, you know, you perceive I sound uneducated, but the fact of the matter is I have something wrong with my mouth that requires surgery, and I'm slow to speak, and I say things wrong. But bias, I'll use your word, brings out the fact that when CNN interviewed the juror, that she felt sorry for her because she was uneducated. And the truth of the matter is, she says, I'm educated, I just got a problem speaking. And it's not because of my education, it's because of a fact within our mouth. I want to go now to the statement made by President Barack Obama. And the president did weigh in on the Trayvon Martin situation even before the case went to trial, saying that Trayvon Martin would have been any one of his children if it went in that kind of direction. But this is the statement that has been made by President Barack Obama, and we'll show it on the screen right now, and then we'll also get an opportunity to hear from those Roy and Pastor English to give us a little bit more as to what the president said. So let's roll with the president's statement right now, and we'll go to that right now and take a look and see what he says. Actually, we don't have it. I'll get it in a few seconds. But let me go back here, because we were talking a little bit about economic empowerment. I received this message while I was here on the show. It was saying that people are being asked right now, that some people are being asked to make sure to boycott the Koch Company, which manufactures paper products. And paper products such as Dixie plates, napkins, bowls, Mardi Gras napkins, paper towels, quilted northern toilet papers, soft and gentle toilet paper, sparkle napkins, and the list goes on, because they're saying that the Koch family was a major contributor to the George Zimmerman lawyer, to his legal defense team. And so even right now, the public is calling on some sort of, economic boycott, if you will. Do you find this to be one of the best ways in terms of dealing with this situation, as we hear some people now calling for an economic boycott of Koch and anybody that supports Zimmerman's legal team?
Well, I think it's an effective strategy, but I think we have to think about it critically so we can determine at the outset what kind of an outcome. We don't want to just do it and then it fizzles out and you don't achieve any, what was the point of it all? So, I think that's a kind of a national kind of conversation, and that's why I think houses of worship have to lead that, to create some sort of a network of communication between all of us, to say, what's our best strategy, and let's whatever that is, let's do it nationally, And so, we live in a capitalistic society. Money talks.
Money talks, absolutely. Where do you think we go from here?
Well, I just wanted to say one quick thing.
Yeah,
the Koch brothers are more than just behind the George Zimmerman defense. They're behind the SB 1070 law out in Arizona. They're behind Stand Your Ground laws. And so these are talking about really destructive conservative forces globally that are really trying to take over the world. I mean, not just in the picking in the brain context, but like literally they're trying to take over the world. So where we go from here is we have to have a continual dialogue that has to happen on a national level. While it's great to have it locally, but we need to have a national discussion so that everybody can hear what we need to do about the institutional racism that exists in this country. And we need to have the president on board with that. I am a supporter of President Obama, and I've met with him and I've listened to his vision for the country, but I have to tell you, I was very disappointed in his statement. He is not just a president who happens to be African American.